You can always say crazy things. Excellent. I believe we're live with our last virtually connecting session from the Digital Pedagogy Lab Institute in Fredericksburg, Virginia. I think I got all of that right. I'm Ken Bauer, your virtual buddy for today. And why don't we go live to on-site so we can introduce who's there with us.
You're the super guest.
Start with Martha from my left to right.
Okay, sorry. We're Martha Burtis. I work here in Fredericksburg at the University of Mary Washington, directing a center called the Digital Knowledge Center.
Robin Wharton. I am on the English department faculty at Georgia State University in Atlanta. And I am also a board member on Hybrid Pedagogy, which is sort of the umbrella organization or for a Digital Pedagogy Lab. So
thanks. And why don't you introduce yourself as well, Brittany and Dan?
I'm Brittany Brown-O'Donnell, and I just graduated with an instructional design ed specialist degree from Virginia Tech.
Daniel Lyons, instructional designer from Davidson College, also editor at Hybrid Pedagogy.
And how about we go on site while I'm trying to contact someone here? We'll go Keegan, and then Sherry, then Terry.
All right. My name is Keegan. I am an educational technologist at the University of Oklahoma and work with faculty on their different projects, from domain of one's own to games and learning and, I don't know, all kinds of fun stuff. So, yeah.
Okay. I'm Sherry Strelitz, and I have not managed to find the toolbox that allows me to put my name on this thing. So, hi, everybody. It's nice to see you. I teach elementary PE at the American International School in Vienna, Austria.
Terry. Are you there, Terry? You're muted, buddy. Oh, well. Terry will come back with us shortly. I'm Ken Bauer, Associate Professor of Computing Science here at the Tecnológico de Monterrey in Guadalajara, Mexico, and your virtual buddy for today. Do we have sound from you now, Terry? I guess not. He had issues with sound yesterday when he was VBing and I took over. So why don't you let us know what's going on in this last day? Everyone's getting ready to continue the conversation going forward after today.
Do you hear me
on
now?
Site.
Did you hear that?
Yeah, go ahead then, Terry.
Hi, I'm Terry Green. I'm at Fleming College in Peterborough, Ontario, Canada. I'm a learning technology specialist, and we do things like still kind of faking domain of one's own, but trying to push towards doing it for real, and lots of pushing towards open learning for the teachers and the students.
Okay, I'm going to tweet stuff out and let's, oh, we got someone come in. LaDonna's in.
Yes,
Good.
I made it. Thank you
That's
so
what
much.
I was trying to do just now.
Yep, I'm all good. Thank you.
Why don't you introduce us to you?
Sure. My name's LaDonna Minnis. I'm an instructional designer and I'm out in Southern California. I actually just returned from the COLT conference in Colorado late last night. So desperately drinking coffee this morning and glad to connect with you all.
Excellent. Nice to have you here. Is this your first time virtually connecting with us?
No, I've done a couple sessions previously.
Okay, good. Sorry, I might not have seen you before. I always like to make
No
sure
worries.
we introduce the new people. So let's go on
you.
site. Martha and Robin, what's going on there?
Well, we had two keynotes this morning, kind of a joint keynote to close the conference, Chris Gilliard and Maha Bali. And then we had a little bit of time in our cohorts I know in my cohort, we were kind of reflecting a little bit on the keynote and wrapping up our conversations for the week, doing some sharing of stuff people had been working on and some ideas people were planning on taking back to their campuses. And then we had lunch, which was nice, and Chipotle.
Yeah, and I think, you know, similar, like, you know, for me, I think the theme of this week has been just watching the way that my, you know, kind of colleagues in my cohort, and then also the people who were leading the session, but then also I think Chris and Maha this morning in the keynote, just modeling this way of being a teacher that is sort of understanding the kind of contingency of privilege and power and that sort of thing, and the tentativeness in some ways that with which you should approach the situation. We talked about intersectionality, which I thought was a good way to kind of end the week in our session, and so it's been so good, because I think we don't, as we kind of move out, what I will take back with me is that, sort of modeling, right? Like that we don't, because in some ways it is a new way to teach, or a way that we didn't experience teachers like that as we were coming up, at least not in any sort of like intentional way, right? And so having role models to model that, like what we're trying to be and do in our classroom, has been, like, I think one of the biggest takeaways for me this week.
And you, Brittany, the fellow?
I think my takeaway this week has been voice, which goes along with modeling and making room for that voice. I was in the design track, and so we spent a lot of time talking about our design principles and things, and one of mine is definitely to allow room for voice, but also to model voice, because we talked about how unfamiliar it is for students to have room to share their voice, and so to model that room and design to create.
I was in the data literacy track, and it was awesome. If you ever have a chance to hang out with Chris Schaffer and talk about data and, well, anything really, he's just such a really kind person. And I had a few people this week, and I'm not pushing back on this necessarily, but they had this conception that it was like this advanced track, that you had to be very technical and all these things. And I kept saying, like, I'm probably one of the least technical people here. It was really about how to be human with data, and what is on how we give where data comes from actually was kind of how we started out, like in the Latin, to give something, from datum. And then, but now we're in a point where, people talk about collecting data, and they're not actually thinking about they don't care about who gives stuff. Harold in the track at one point talking about his Edmodo experience, which was pretty intense. And I was in Robin's intellectual property session for the workshop on Wednesday. Yeah, which was great. I've mostly just sat and listened to people, because I love being in places with smart people, and this has been a great place to hang out with smart people. So that's probably all I'm going to say until we close.
Really put the pressure on.
Oh, no, I'm just kidding. No, but it has been a fun week, and I've met a bunch of kind of like domains, and for me, Open Ed 16, where I met a lot of the people that I've been following online and reading their work, and I've gotten to meet them for the first time in person. And last time I met you at Domains, I think, for the first time in person. So it's another one of those, for me, a takeaway is just to get to see how people, like what kinds of shoes people wear and how they dress and stuff. Because like, even when we meet them in virtually connecting, we always just see headshots. So you never see people's shoes.
You should do a virtually connecting that's just people's shoes.
That would be very cool.
Right there.
I could do that, but
we should try to think of some kind of pun there, like how that could work, like virtually pun, virtually.
Well, before it was virtually connecting, bring your friends. Now it's virtually connecting, bring your shoes.
Show your shoes.
Yeah. No, or just how people dress too. Like when you spend 5 days with people, you kind of really get an idea of what kinds of fashion and stuff. And I don't know. I care about that stuff usually. I say that, but right now I'm wearing my CrossFit shoes, so I'm not really modeling that.
The laces.
The laces are good.
Awesome.
The laces are good.
That's funny. It occurs to me as you're saying that how often when I'm interacting online with people through, let's say, Twitter, which I use almost entirely as a professional space, that people who I've never met in person, how quickly and easily I ascribe in my head an affect to them. Like without even realizing I'm doing it, I do it. And then I meet them in person, and there's always this weird disconnect as that affect that you've created for them for whatever reason. I couldn't even say where it comes from. Probably because they remind me, maybe their picture or their way they communicate reminds me of someone I know in real life. And so you try and then you meet them in person, and it's so jarring sometimes when you realize, oh no, it's not just even like how I imagined you looked. I actually had an idea of what you might sound like and carry yourself.
Yeah.
And you're not that at all. And it's really interesting. Never really thought about it.
I think that's how virtually connecting helps us, that we're actually seeing each other's face and voice. It makes a big difference for sure.
But not shoes.
Or jeans.
My shoes aren't that interesting.
The shoe thing is actually really big because Chris Friend really blew my mind this week. He came here with no checked baggage. So just in his carry-on, he had 6 pairs of shoes.
I know.
And they're all like amazing shoes.
He has the coolest shoes.
He has a bunch of Fluvogs. I think 4 of the pairs were Fluvog shoes. So I brought 1 pair of Fluvogs, a pair of sandals, and my sneakers. So that's actually, but I drove here. He did like check bag.
Right, yeah.
But it helps, like he has big feet.
Right.
And then he just curls everything up and puts them in his shoes, and then they just layer. I checked I actually looked at my suitcase and I was like, I could totally do that if I wanted
He
to.
puts his clothes in his shoes.
Yeah, a lot of them.
It's occurring to me, this is probably not what you were expecting us to talk
No,
about.
well, earlier this week, Alan led the bacon session of virtually connecting, and I think this will be the shoe session of virtually connecting.
Shoe game.
Shoe game. Yesterday it was interesting. You're talking about I can't remember what topic, but I remember yesterday Miranda was talking about the fact that she's recently graduated, and a lot of us are worrying so much about Chris's talk. Sherry was with us yesterday, where they were talking about not forcing or asking our students to use platforms that they don't have control of their data. And Miranda kind of went to a point, I don't want to completely quote her, but saying that as students, they don't care so much about this. And I don't know if you have thoughts on that. I don't know if you were with us as well, Brittany, yesterday?
I was not, but I recently graduated. It's not something, without this community, it's not something I would have put a lot of thought into. From an educational perspective. Interestingly, from a health perspective, I come at it differently. So I have a number of chronic illnesses, and the health system is very private. And I've actually wanted to open up and put my data out there. So like, hey, anybody can help me and crowdsource. And it's a different dichotomy. So I thought about it in one context, but not in another.
That's really interesting, because I think the way that I approach it, and probably I get this from domains and from reading Audrey Waters' work and stuff like that, is that like I want my students to be able to do what they want with their data, right? That like, you know, that sort of, that on the one hand, I am really skeptical, or at least ambivalent about, like, because also at Georgia State, I need to sort of clarify too, I come from this background where at Georgia State, they're sort of at the leading edge of using, you know, kind of data to feed back into student advising. And they've done some amazing things to close the achievement gap for Pell eligible students, for first generation college students, for students of color. I mean, and it's incredible what they've done. And so I'm like, that's just so great that they've been able to do this. But then at the same time, I'm like, well, what happens to this data after? And like, when we're using this data-driven approach, are we using it in ways that are intentional and kind of reflective, and understanding how like the data, like using the data to kind of track students or stream students and that sort of thing, maybe reinforcing problems, right? Rather than solving them. So I have that, but then I'm also like, you know, I also react really strongly when people are like, but what about FERPA? And you're having your students blog publicly and stuff like that. And because I feel really strongly, it's not my choice, right? It's students' choice. And I try to create an atmosphere in which they can make a choice about being public. And a lot of them are like, yes, let me put myself out there. Let me put this data out there. And, you know, and people are online anyway, but, you know, it's about giving control. And that's ultimately what FERPA is about too, right? Like it's about, it's about giving people control to decide the situations in which they want to make their data private, not forcing them to have it private if they don't want to. But also, you know, like if they want to opt out of your system, to let them do that too.
We have a project that's unfolding here at Mary Washington that I kind of knew about secondhand, and then got pulled into a demonstration of it. I guess it was in May, So it's for an app that the university has hired this company, I'm not gonna remember the name of the company, to develop. And it's not a custom app just for us. They work with all kinds of schools, and they've come up with this product that allows them to build an app that does all kinds of things. But one of the primary things it does is it allows you to create, it's really cute, it allows you to create journeys for your students to take. And it's meant to address problems with students not knowing what they have to do in order to get the stuff of college done. And I don't mean like in the classroom, I mean like the process of college. Mm-hmm. And part of it, I understand like the impetus, like it's partly driven by more and more first generation college students coming to our schools who don't have people at home who have been through this before and who can give them that advice and can help them navigate that. And when you stop and you think about what it's like to come to college when you don't have that context, and we start bandying around all of these terminology and kind of jargon, that for many first year students, it's just incredibly overwhelming. So I understand completely why we would want to help with that. So anyway, so we have this app, you can create these journeys, and we go to this information session, and it becomes like increasingly clear in the information session that there's a lot of data tracking happening here, right? Because that's actually how they're helping students, is by seeing whether or not they've completed the steps on the journey, and whether they've responded to questions that have been asked of them, or completed surveys that have been given to them. And in one of the sessions, and they don't know as they're giving us this presentation that they're talking to the school that originated domain of one's own, much less what domain of one's own even is. So we're at one of the sessions and we're like, well, what about data tracking? Like, can students opt out of having their data tracked? And like, this seems problematic. And their response to us was, don't worry, students don't care. And I was like, that's what I'm worried about. Like,
exactly.
That's exactly why I'm worried. Like, and they don't care because we've told them not to worry. And it's antithetical to what we're trying to do at Mary Washington with domain of one's own. And they actually said they had a student session. So it came up in this big session in the morning, then there was a breakout session with students, and then I was in a smaller group session in the afternoon. And we brought it up in the big session where they were like, don't worry, students don't care. Then they had the student session, and then it came up again in the afternoon, and they said, this is the first time we've ever been somewhere where this actually came up in the student session. And I was like, yeah, good, I'm glad.
Doing something right.
But yeah, I'm increasingly struck by the ways in which we read what our students tell us, we read what our students are saying as though they haven't learned whatever it is they're from us, right? Like, the other thing that will come up with this app is people will be like, it's great, it's going to give them all of this guidance and step them through everything so that it'll be so much easier for them. And I'm like, that's fine, but then don't come to me in a year and say our students are worthless. They can only do things if it's on a step-by-step list that we give them.
Right.
Because guess what? We taught them that.
Yeah.
Like,
yes.
So
Don't
true.
remove the humans from the process so much.
right.
That comes up too, I think, where, in conversations, there's, you hear these conversations a lot about like, well, college students just aren't prepared when they come into college, or college students just aren't prepared when they go into the workplace or whatever. And no one actually like talks about, and I teach like technical and professional communication. And so, I'm like, I am totally aware that I need to talk to my students about what it means to be professional, right? Mm-hmm. Or to write a resume, or the do's and don'ts of interviewing, or whatever, or client communication. But then at the same time, I also feel that it's upon me to talk to them about how those assumptions about professionalism, or what to put on your resume, what not to put on your resume, are totally classist and racist mm-hmm. and ableist and mm-hmm. ageist in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And so that, and I feel like that's a conversation that we need to be, that the university is like an ideal place to have, that we're not necessarily having. Yeah. Like how,
right.
Not only are we, kind of setting up our students, like we are teaching our students right. how to behave and right. what to do and that sort of thing, but also that we are, here to interrogate the expectations that are
the system
of the system, and yeah. that, like, yes, they need to be aware of the system, but also the system isn't like this impenetrable or like, you know, this immutable thing.
Right.
Yeah.
That reflects a bit of the conversation that Miranda had yesterday, actually, where we were talking about that we need more students within these events so that we get the view of the students as well. But she was also noticing that because she's recently graduated, she was getting a complete different view of the faculty or other members of the university, and getting a bit more view of what goes on behind the scenes that they never really see, but kind of seeing how things are cooked. And maybe sometimes we need to give a bit more of that visibility or transparency to our students.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, like, you know, it's not a McDonald's, right? Like, you know, that if we want to move away from this idea that education is like a product or a service, right? Like invite students into the kitchen a little bit more. Like, I find that like students a lot of times, like, just explaining like why are we doing this particular thing, or, you know, what am I hoping that you'll get out of this group work that you hate doing that provides this, you know, that can be really onerous to like get everyone on the same page. Like, just if you've ever tried to set up a meeting, you know what that's like. And that can be just like, but I think it's like an authority thing. Like, maybe we don't want to do that because we don't want them to see the kitchen where it's messy, or that it, you know, or maybe interrogate our reasons for doing something, you know, because it opens up that door.
For years, for K through 12, we're very often taught, don't even think about coming to the kitchen.
Yeah.
Like, this is how it is.
Right. Yeah.
And trying to pull them in as undergrads is scary, and they don't like it.
We were in my, actually this came up because I can't remember if Jesse is the one who brought it up or if somebody else did, but Jesse was talking about this because we have a few students on site here. 2 of my tutors and 2 students who work for Jesse have been working a lot of this week and have been doing some formal stuff, running the Ingenious bar here, but also just been present to help out with whatever came up. And Jesse had told them going into the event, feel free to sit in on a track you're interested in, or just pop in, and, you know, and I think in a couple of different like informal channels, people had said, well, it'd be really nice to have some students in here. And he said, well, interestingly, they didn't take advantage of that. And people were like, well, why do you, and they were looking at me, they were like, well, why do you think that is? Because 2 of them are my tutors. And I was like, you know, I really, it's a weird question to answer, because in a way it's like, I'm not the person who can answer that question. We need to ask them. But my suspicion is that some of it has to do with we're a part of this kind of community in a way that they don't even understand. Like, so they're kind of watching us going, people talk a lot. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, wow. You know, like, and I can kind of understand that. Some of that is a developmental thing, and some of they haven't gotten into a career yet where they have that kind of particular investment. But in a way, shouldn't our goal be for our students to have that kind of investment in what they're doing in school? Like, shouldn't that not feel so foreign to them? That kind of like devoted interrogation to a particular, you know, interest or topic, or, you know, like. And I think people who work in academia get it, because we do it all the time. But even like my friends who work outside of academia would come to witness something like this and be like, you're just going to spend a week like just talking about like pedagogy, like, and what's pedagogy again? Yeah. You know,
I think some of our colleagues in academia find it
it's true. It's true.
I think
so. Yeah, there's a real cultural divide there.
I think one of the things for me that kind of parallels that feeling, and I'm not saying that it's the reason, the why, but I know for myself, like when I was at the very beginning of being in on some of this community and being able to, like you, Daniel, go to Open Ed 16 and stuff, like looking from the outside, like I was actually at that point before like I'd received invitations and stuff, but I didn't know that my opinions and thoughts were like valuable amongst many of the folks that I looked up to. And I think like I think maybe that is, at least when I was a student, I felt that way in certain circles as well, in terms of like hanging out with faculty that I looked up to, and it was just hard in the sense, because like I don't know, like not having both the confidence of the topic, but then also the life experience and you know, the things we've been saying, especially recently, about, you know, we want students because we want their take and their experience. I think they're still very timid, and that is where a lot of their value can be, in addition to, you know, they are scholars, right? They're junior scholars or scholars in training, whatever you want to call that. But I think, I mean, for me at least, that's kind of the direction I would lean, just from personal experience and things of that nature.
That's really interesting that Miranda was the one. I think she's short hair, glasses, right? Yeah, she was in the networks track with me, and she has been, like, her recent experience post graduation is working as faculty at a really progressive school. I don't know if she talked about this, but you know, that sort of idea where, like, when you create a culture of like, here is where students take ownership of their education, and this is what we do here. Like, I think that's become a part of the conversation that we're having on campus. That is something that UMW has probably gone through with Domain. Like, you know, this is like, when you create a culture where students care about their data and what happens, then they care about their data, and they ask, same sort of thing that you're saying, that it can't just be like, oh, we invite them in when it's convenient, or we ask one person to be there. Like, it has to be, and I think that sometimes people get tired of having the conversation. Right. But, which is, I think, what you're saying as well, you know, like, you have to keep having the conversation all the time, and wherever students are, and not just make them come into your space.
Well, and it's also, there's this weird, you also have to be really careful to not ask them to come and perform for you. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, when you've got like 4 students on site here, to be like, okay, now come in our track and be the student. Yeah. It's kind of like a weird, that's kind of a weird thing to ask of them. If that's not something that they're comfortable with, or doesn't come naturally, and plus they're just one student who happens to be here, it doesn't necessarily mean that, I mean, obviously more student voices is good, but you want those to feel natural and comfortable and authentic, not sort of like engineered.
Yeah, the group that came with Adam Kurum at Open Ed, that was just wonderful. That was my favorite session. I don't know if you were there, Keegan, Terry.
I was with you, Ken.
Yeah, it was a wonderful session. Yeah, I was being snarky, I remember.
Oh.
It had Andrew Reichard was one of the speakers there. Fantastic F-bomb during his talk. I really appreciated it. I laughed so hard.
But I think, like you said, Martha, it wasn't, they were already on site. They came to the event, and it's a very different experience as to running around helping, and then here, come in and tell them stuff.
Yeah.
I think we're close to time, Ken, and I don't know what people are. Yeah, we should maybe wrap up. Are there any questions from anyone from the offsite peoples? We haven't heard Sherry hasn't said anything. Ladina, anything?
Yeah. Something that came to mind for me, actually, when we're talking about kind of students who maybe didn't think it was important that their data was being collected and kind of didn't care. I recently did a workshop with high school students, and it was on digital literacy, and we used the 5 rights framework. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it. I think Kate Green was helping working on that as part of her thesis, but we did a focus group essentially, and we looked at terms and conditions of a lot of popular applications that they already use. And the students kind of went through and highlighted anything that was unfamiliar or that they weren't sure what that meant. And then we kind of went through some of those things and talked about them. And I felt they really did care, because by the time we were done with that, they were like, I'm deleting this app right now. You know, and I think it might start a little bit earlier when, you know, younger students are kind of, it will eventually kind of move into, you know, using educational platforms and having the same kind of insight into what's being done with their data, because I think they might not care because they don't exactly know how it's being used. And so they're just like, oh, that's fine, I don't care. But when they find out that, you know, for example, Snapchat owns all of their content, even though it disappears, everything Snapchat still has, and they can use for whatever they want, then they care.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which for us is, well, surprise, surprise, but for my daughter and her classmates, they don't know that.
Yeah. And I don't read terms and conditions most of the time. I just said, yeah, that's fine. Like, you know, and it's not something that's part of our culture to like really take the time to look through a lot of that stuff sometimes. And we have to start building in that practice at an earlier age, so that by the time they're in, you know, in university, then they can have that same kind of response.
Yeah, I think the other thing we have to start doing is pushing back on the people writing those terms of service. Because the reason we don't read them isn't necessarily just because, well, not because we don't care, and not necessarily because we don't want to, but because they're actually not written for humans. Right. Like they're right. You can't understand them. And so, I mean, I really respect the companies that in the last, you know, 6 or 7, 8 years have created like human readable terms of service. And I think that's a really, really important thing for us to be pushing companies about.
Well, and
yeah,
for
I agree.
Institutions to do it.
Yes.
Because as individuals, like, it's a click-through license. It's like you can use this or you cannot. Like, we don't necessarily have that arm's length negotiating power. But, you know, if your university is going to spend tens or sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars for an LMS or some sort of application or something like that, then their lawyers need to be in there, like blue lining, you know, those contracts and saying, look, this is just not, and they need to involve the entire campus community, including students, in maybe setting up like that 5 rights framework, like on this campus, these are the things that we want to make sure are in every single contract that we have with vendors. And if you're not willing to negotiate with us, well, then there's another vendor out there that can provide the service.
Yeah. And just to interject, the second part of that activity, I know we are just about out of time, was for the students to kind of talk about, okay, what would you say to the people who wrote these terms and conditions, and how would you communicate that with them? What do you want them to know?
That's great.
That's great.
Yeah.
All right. Anything to add, Sherry, before we close up? All right. Well, why don't we close up? Thank you so much for your time today, Martha, Robin, Brittany, Daniel, and who's behind the camera as well. I don't know who's there, but thanks so much for your time. And it's been wonderful virtually connecting with DPLI.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you. So
Have a good one.
Have a great weekend.
See ya.
Still running if we want to make any last moment ads as they're logging out. We can go open mic if you got anything else to add, Keegan. Thanks so much for adding that, Keegan. That's really, really important. I think it's on us that can give people space, that we need to work much harder at giving people space.
Well, I think too that, I mean, like getting into VC has definitely been helpful, and the community here has certainly been positive. But that first activation energy, that first hump to get over is always the toughest in that regard. But it's, I mean, for anyone that is considering, it's definitely been worth it, I would say. It's fun to navigate through some of these ideas and just this journey with this community in particular. So
I think
we're replicating out there. Go ahead, Terry.
It's just like a nature of people interested in open education in general are so open to sharing that it's a nice, easy entry into the community. Like I went to Open Ed in Richmond. I saw you guys there, obviously. It was there where I met so many people in person and was able to build like a network from there. But everybody there was just it's like we're friends as soon as we meet kind of thing. It's great.
Yeah. And I think it helps build deeper. And Sherry, you've written about this as well.
That's what I do. But I'm going to go. So thank you.
Go, Sherry. Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, I know for those that are watching, Sherry's written a lot about this, about her experience attending DPLI last year online and then being in the sessions in Vancouver. So I think it's really important to open this space for people to talk and encourage them, because I know my view of Keegan's changed since, like, wow, it doesn't seem that long ago, but it was 8 months or so ago at Open Ed, and I barely knew you, and then it was like you become more participative, and you've been on a lot of the sessions this week, actually.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, part of it has been like I think VC has helped like strengthen those bonds and those relationships, especially. For me though, I don't know, I really like that the first interactions often to be in person, just because it's like, I don't know, there's so much that you get out of that interaction in terms of, but yeah, this being able to like maintain that, for sure, VC has been instrumental with, at least on my end. So
that's good things for us to think about going forward with VC.
I will say also, Ken, that I mean, you know, that first circle with you guys all sitting around, like just you saying, you know, have a seat and come over here, like it wasn't, I don't even think I necessarily said anything in that circle, but just like being in the same place of all these Twitter folks that you just are like, man, I read that stuff, and you know, like now we're sitting next to each other and whatnot. So
I think it's an age thing, Keegan, because I remember I was that way, and as I've had more experience with conferences, I'm actually shy. I will be the person in the corner, just off in the corner, and I'm not part of these people and not included. But because of my age and more experience, I've forced myself into those discussions. So I think it's important to realize that I was in that space before, and it's really important to, even if you don't say anything, like you said, that you're there and you feel like, okay, it's going to take me a couple days, but I'll be able to say something in this group, and that's important for me. So cool. I think I'm glad you noticed that.
It's very different, I guess, from like a normal, just like, I don't know, because so I'll admit I'm an extreme extrovert. Like I definitely gain more energy by being around folks, for sure. But I think the thing that's different about academic communities is like, it's not just, I don't know, for me, it wasn't about just the interactions with the people. It's also like, you know, like everyone's smart and has all these awesome ideas and stuff, right? And you want to, I don't know, you want to feel valued in that and contributions as well, in addition to the normal social things on top of it. But yeah.
It's great reflections. It's great reflections. Anything to add before we sign out, Terry?
I have a question, just in case you know. Where might I find the keynote from this morning? I know I had it up. I just can't think of where I would find it.
If you go to I actually have it keyed up here, so I will link it in our chat. But the UMW DTLT YouTube channel has the keynotes from the entire event. The Vancouver event, Sean Michael Morris put it up on his YouTube channel, which only he doesn't have anything else other than those events.
I was looking and I saw that.
That's where I looked originally, and then it came up in my feed. It's the UMW DTLT YouTube channel.
Oh, yeah, I see it. Thank you.
I'll link it there for you. Wonderful. Well, I'm going to sign us out here today. Thanks, guys. It was a wonderful conversation. And I'm going to miss this because this is the last one for the week.
Yep.
All right. Signing out, virtually connecting from TPLI.